for those people that have left a high control group and have a loved one or someone they care about in a high control group, the question is, how can we help those people? And of course, there are various different ways, but I will just try to kind of give you a basic summary. So helping people in high control groups, it's a process. Don't consider it like I'm going to talk to them once and they're going to leave. Don't have an unrealistic expectation. I know that most people don't, but some people do. So remember that it's a process and it requires a lot of patience, a lot of effort, a lot of empathy, respect, kindness, and also adaptability. You need to learn how to adapt to their situation. You need to learn to empathize with them. These are extremely important things. So before you try to approach them, I think it would be important to educate yourself on the psychology of high control groups and to learn how to effectively communicate with those types of people. Don't make any assumptions about them. Make sure that you educate yourself regarding how they function. And even while you're communicating with them, what I think is important is that, once again, don't make assumptions about them. Rather ask questions. Let them explain it. It's one of the things that they're very frustrated about. Like, for example, ACJ, is that there's so much misinformation about ACJ online. And they get very frustrated when people keep assuming stuff. When I left ACJ and my family, they knew that I was an ACJ. They also made a lot of assumptions because they assumed that the stuff written about ACJ on the internet, it's all true. And a lot of it is just complete rubbish. It's just not true at all. It has no effect on ACJ because it is, I don't know where the information comes from, but it's just complete lies. It's not true at all. So make sure that you don't make assumptions and ask good questions, be curious. And so try to interact with them through regular communication and rebuild a relationship with them if it has been broken. So focus the conversations on common values and interests while avoiding sensitive topics. So there can be certain topics about perhaps their leader or their organization or their doctrine that will be very sensitive to them. Avoid that. Don't talk about those things directly. Rather speak about what you and them have in common. What are important to both of you? What are things that you're interested in? Talk about those things. That is extremely important to rebuild a relationship. Take your time. Don't try to force it. So ultimately, you should try to sustain constant positive interaction. Keep everything positive. Keep it light. Don't try to put them on the spot. Don't unnecessarily poke them on sensitive topics and try to kind of create some kind of emotion. It doesn't work. That's the kind of approach that a lot of people take. It doesn't work. It could perhaps work. There could perhaps be a couple of cases, but generally speaking, it's not a good idea. Yeah.
And would you say that not only does it not work, but probably in many cases, it just more strongly solidifies them in their belief, and it might push them back further into it. It might cause them to recluse even further and deeper into it. And it'll probably almost give them more weapons to say, oh, this is persecution.
Persecuted.
This is exactly what the Bible says I should expect, which is going to reinforce that, oh, I am on the right path because this is what God said would happen to me. And so really that approach could backfire big time, which is why I think what you're saying is that you need to be very careful on how you approach any time you're going to try to challenge. I think there are times to challenge. There are times to poke in certain ways, but I think you got to be very careful, and you got to discern when is the appropriate time to do that and when is not, because it could really, I think, backfire big time.
I agree. No, absolutely. So as you've mentioned, is when you try to attack them too directly, too quickly, they'll consider it persecution, and then they'll think this is, the enemy trying to deceive them, and this is an opportunity God has given them to test their faith, and they'll focus more on the work that they're doing, and it's ultimately through them also chatting about this persecution with leaders in the church and them being consulted, it'll ultimately most likely reinforce their kind of conviction in the organization and their rules and doctrines and goals and stuff like that. So it tends to have the opposite effect of what people actually want. So I definitely agree with what you said. So there needs to be this kind of constant interaction with them, rebuilding a relationship. And when you build trust with them, it's, of course, what I'm saying now is pretty obvious, but you should build it through integrity, transparency, discretion. If, like, for example, be honest, be open, don't keep unnecessary secrets, don't lie to them. I've heard people that say that, oh, because ACJ lies to them, they can also kind of when they try to get people out, they also kind of sometimes speak a lie here or there. Don't do that. Be completely honest. Don't keep secrets. Be open and honest. You've got nothing to hide. Like there's been cases where people will contact me and they'll say that they're in ACJ, they need help. And there's cases where those same people contacted other people on Reddit, and those Reddit people contacted me and said, isn't this maybe someone that's in ACJ that's trying to get us back? Isn't it an ACJ spy that's just trying to spy on us? And my response that I usually give is, it doesn't matter, because I'll still speak the truth. I'll still be open and honest. It doesn't make a difference. I've got nothing to hide. ACJ can have someone that can chat with me for 6 months, pretending like they doubt and they're not actually doubting. I don't care. I'll still give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'll still be open and honest. I have nothing to lose. Like I said, I don't think that they would be able to convince me again. But my point still stands, is that be open, be honest, and maintain discretion. Meaning that if you're chatting with someone in ACJ and they're sharing sensitive private information with you, please do not go and share it with like your pastor at your church or random other people. If the ACJ person wants you to keep it a secret, if it's something they're sharing with you in confidence, please maintain discretion. It's extremely, extremely important. In ACJ, they tend to not maintain discretion. So when people are doubting, they're afraid to talk to anyone in the church, because even if they talk to someone in the church and they tell that person, please keep this between us, they don't. They have to report it to the leaders because they think that they have a responsibility to save these people. So don't be like that. Don't go and just report it to other people if you're part of some kind of group that wants to help someone. If someone in ACJ tells you something in confidence, keep it to yourself. Trust is extremely important. And if you can't keep it to yourself, then don't expect them to trust you. I mean, to be honest as well, from my point of view, if you can't maintain discretion with someone in ACJ that's doubting, you don't deserve to be trusted to begin with. So I would urge everyone to please be very discreet about sensitive information that they share with you. Keep it to yourself. You don't need to share it with other people. I'm not saying absolutely everything. I'm saying if there's something very personal or very private that someone in ACJ shares with you, don't go and put it on social media or tell it to the whole family or share it with your church or whatever. There's certain stuff that if you want someone to trust you, you need to be discreet. It's extremely important. So try to give, if you're chatting with someone at ACJ, try to give them the opportunity to be exposed to new ideas that are not shared within the group, so that they can discern for themselves and see the world from a different perspective. So try to ask them thought-provoking questions while being kind and curious. So listen carefully to their answers, take interest in their ideas, and try to understand them better over time. So the goal of the conversations that you have with them, it's not, you don't have to agree about things. Of course, if most of us, when we chat with ACJ people, when it comes to religious things, we're not going to agree with them. And you don't need to agree. The goal of the conversation is not to necessarily agree with each other, but it's understand each other. And this is sometimes ACJ's approach. When they chat with people outside of the church, they usually try to convert people. They try to convert people to join their organization. So when they view communication with outsiders, generally speaking, they view it as, I need to get you to agree with me. We shouldn't take that approach. Our goal should not be to get them to agree with us, but rather let's have understanding. Let's understand each other. That's our primary focus. Whether they agree with us or not is not the main goal. So keep the conversations, keep it positive, keep it productive, and keep it civil. And try not to get angry. Even if they say some stuff that's very unethical or offensive, sometimes you just got to keep that inside. And it's not just for yourself. You're doing it for them. And remember that you're doing these things. Sometimes we have to keep certain things inside for the sake of actually helping another person. So, of course, if you're really angry, I'm not telling you to completely suppress it. You can vent it at a later time. But if you're going to vent all of your anger against ACJ in a conversation with someone in ACJ, you're not going to be able to help them. It's not going to work. I'm sure that most people understand this. So yeah, it's better to end a conversation than to say something counterproductive. If you get to a point where you feel like this is no longer productive, just end the conversation, change the topic, or meet at another time. You can return to that kind of conversation or topic at a later time, because you don't want the ACJ person that you're communicating with to break contact with you completely because they're upset with you or because they're afraid of what you're saying or something like that. So, you know, you can kind of discern over time what you can and what you can't say. That depends on the situation. But one of the things that, as I've mentioned before, what cults do is that they suppress your authentic identity. So try to connect people in a cult, if you communicate with them, try to connect them with their authentic identity before joining the group. If you're like a family member or friend that knew them before the group, remind them of past experiences and how you missed the connection that you used to have with them. Remind them of the past. Let them remember who they used to be. And this will ultimately make their authentic identity resurface. So, and this is very important, avoid telling them what to believe, but rather empower them to discern for themselves and come to their own conclusions. This is extremely important. And this is a mistake that I think a lot of people make, is what they tend to do is they'll tell you, you need to believe this and this and this and this and this. Don't take the same approach with them. And one of the worst things that I think that has happened, some people have done this with SCJ, and when I was in SCJ, I was against it, and I'm still against it, is you have cases where there will be pastors and kind of Christian counselors outside of SCJ that they will literally like kind of kidnap SCJ people, force them into a room, and then in a forceful way try to convert them to another doctrine from another church. Now, this is grossly immoral in my point of view. So don't coerce them into believing something else. Empower them. Let them think for themselves. Let them come to their own conclusions. When you empower them, they will start to think. They will start to be a bit more skeptical. They will start to doubt. They will start asking questions. And through that, they will come to their own conclusions. And in that way, when they leave, they will know that it's their own decision. You've simply empowered them. You haven't controlled them the way that SCJ has controlled them. So give them the opportunity to leave with freedom in the way that they never had when they joined the organization to begin with. So we have to look at the way that SCJ recruits people, and we have to be better than that. We shouldn't follow any of the same kind of tactics to try to get someone out of SCJ. Because that's just as bad as what SCJ essentially does.
Yeah, exactly.
So other things that we can do is that in a very subtle way, we can try to teach SCJ members or cult members about things like manipulation, where we can mention things about deception, indoctrination, exploitation, coercion. And we can also try to teach them critical thinking. But it's important that we use examples that they have no emotional attachment to. So we shouldn't teach about how their leader manipulates people. That'll trigger them. Rather, we can, if you teach them like basic principles of like how human beings are manipulative, how we tend to want to control each other, how we are sometimes self-deceptive, how we try to deceive other people to get what we want. There are very interesting kind of anecdotes and psychology articles on these types of topics that's very interesting for people to learn. And all of this will give them an opportunity to start thinking for themselves. So we do it in a very subtle way. It's all about empowering them. But it's very important that we avoid. Yeah.
Sorry. Finish your thought there.
Yeah. So it's very important that we avoid overwhelming them with information. Like, don't just throw a bunch of information on them. Rather, kind of research yourself, study yourself a bit, take an interesting example and use it as a topic for discussion. But of course, you should know how they will respond. So don't just overwhelm them with information, especially if that information opposes their current beliefs, because it will trigger them and you might lose the relationship completely.
So you talk about trying to teach them in subtle ways about things like deception, indoctrination, coercion, these tactics of cults. I know examples, like real life examples of people. I believe they were World Mission Society Church of God members, but obviously a World Mission Society Church of God member isn't going to sit down and pull up a documentary on Netflix that's an anti-WMSCOG documentary. You know, they're not going to do that. But what they might do is watch a documentary about another cult. And I know examples where people have done that. People inside of the WMSCOG have watched documentaries or things like that that talk about other cults and that sort of provide information about how this like other groups might function and take advantage of people, and that caused them to think. It's kind of like it allowed them to come to their own conclusions on their own. And so that might be a helpful suggestion too, just something to think about. It could be as simple as just if there's an opportunity, say, hey, there's this interesting documentary on this group. What do you think about it? And make it to where it has nothing to do with you are approaching it as, hey, you need to think about this because I think you're in a similar group as this. Don't approach it that way, but just as something that you're giving them the opportunity to come across this information on their own. Because I think that's worked in real life situations. I agree. And so that could just be one example of a subtle way to expose them to this sort of information in a way that's not going to trigger them into defense mode.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. That pretty much ties to the idea of not specifically, like, you want to talk about cults in some way, but you don't want to speak in a way that it's too sensitive for them, that they get triggered by it. So I like to send psychology articles to, if there's anyone in ACJ that wants to chat, and sometimes most of the people that usually contact me are already doubtful. So I don't go and try to actively get people out of ACJ, but I know that there are parents, and sometimes, there's a lot of parents that have contacted me and wanted some tips. And I've shared with them some examples of what I would share with someone in ACJ. So there are people in ACJ that are very interested in science and also very interested in things like logical fallacies and certain psychological things. So I think sometimes sending a short article of cognitive biases, or a couple of what are common logical fallacies. Like a while ago, I sent some ACJ people about the sunk cost fallacy, where the article is mostly about economics, but it also mentioned about sacrifice towards, if you belong to a specific group, if you've sacrificed a lot, you're kind of less likely to leave the group. And it just kind of gets them curious and wow, logical fallacy is quite interesting. And then before you know it, you get to other logical fallacies that are more pertaining to what they believe. So the point is, it makes them curious, and it makes them start, thinking for themselves. And you kind of need to start in a subtle way somewhere. So I think an important thing to mention as well is that if there are people inside of a cult that are struggling with mental health, then it's very important that we suggest to them to seek help from a qualified mental health professional, even when they still believe in the doctrine of the cult. Sometimes that can also give them an opportunity to kind of rethink some stuff, to kind of figure out their identity. Sometimes that actually results in people also leaving cults. So there's been cases where people in cults will have mental health problems. They'll speak to their leaders. The leaders will tell them not to go to psychologists because they'll share with you the thoughts of the world. But if you show that you care about them and that you want them to see a professional, and sometimes they'll share some stuff, and before you know it, they start, they rediscover themselves, and they kind of want to leave the organization, not based on conversation with you, but based on conversations with psychologists. So that can also kind of be in that way. So just to kind of finish off, it's very important that we're patient with them. This is a process. If you help people, it's a process, and it takes time. And we shouldn't get easily discouraged. Eventually, a lot of people do leave cults. I'm not necessarily going to say that it will be guaranteed, but there's a specific organization like SCJ. I think that a lot of, when Manny Lee dies, I think a lot of people will leave SCJ already. So it's important that people don't get discouraged, try to maintain relationships, even if it's 4 or 5 years and it doesn't really get any better. If you have that good relationship, when the person eventually do start doubting, it's nice for them to know that they have people outside of the group that cares about them. So they have something to fall back on. So there's a lot of us that left ACJ. We were afraid to leave as well, because we thought if we leave, our family will probably not want to take care of us anymore because we haven't spoken to them in many years. So, they'll perhaps be angry with us and we'll struggle to survive. But my family was actually very embracive. But it would have been even easier if I had a good relationship with my family while I was in ACJ, and I knew that I could easily just go back and rejoin them and have a life. Kind of having that as an opportunity will also, when people are doubting, they're more likely to leave as a result of that as well. So it's important to kind of show cult people that, we care about them and that they've got a home and they've got people to come back to when they eventually do decide to leave, or, when they doubt and they want to perhaps consider leaving.
Yes.
And that's it.
Very
it's
good.
It's been a long video.
That's all right. Well, I love this line here of that last section of how you can help high control cult victims, basically. But you say here in the middle, try to sustain constant positive interaction. And so that of everything you said, that seems to stand out to me as one of the most important pieces of all this, because people those of you who might have family or whoever it is that you have inside of a cult that you want to get them out, I think the most important thing, or one of the most important things for you to pursue, is to be a person in your loved one's life that you are somebody who is a trustworthy, positive, somebody that they can depend on, rely on, somebody that they know is there for you, that cares about them. And so, which is why I think it's so important, going back to what you were saying at first, to avoid, I think in many cases you need to avoid being that person in their life who's constantly just nagging on them about why they're in a cult. Why? Here's evidence. I mean, I think there's appropriate times and places to do that, but as a general rule, I think you want to maybe try to avoid being that person, depending on that. I think what level of if it's in really early stages of them being involved in a cult, maybe that's probably times where it's maybe more going to be more effective, and maybe you should do more of what you can do in those beginning stages. But once they're really their roots have kind of sunk down into this group, I think you want to more or less avoid being that person in their life. I think it's going to be important that you're a person who, when they think about you, they have positive thoughts and feelings about that relationship with you. That you're not somebody who they perceive as somebody who's just going after them, who's an enemy, who's just constantly trying to attack this thing that they hold so closely. Because then you're gonna become somebody who they trust. You're gonna become somebody who they feel like they can open up to and be real with, be honest with, and then you're going to be more likely than to have opportunities to really share, to be somebody who they can really trust to share your concerns or your challenges or whatever they might be. And so I think that's super important. And the other thing is that in cults, as specifically, from my experience with SCJ and WMSCOG, these groups do not care about their members. They don't have a genuine, unconditional care, concern, or love. They care about the members in as much as they can get something out of them, in as much as those members have something to offer back to them. The moment your loved one can no longer offer something to them, or has left the group, they're going to drop them. And so again, that's why you can be somebody in their life who is not that. You can be somebody in their life, obviously, who does have that unconditional love and acceptance of them, and that should look like you loving them, even if they remain a part of this cult. You don't make your relationship with them conditioned on whether or not they leave the cult, because then you're just being exactly like the cults are. You're behaving in a very similar fashion as they do. And so you want to not resort to the behaviors and the tactics in any way that their cults rely on to keep them in.